The first time I saw her, she was adjusting her silk stockings in the powder room mirror of the Ritz-Carlton, and I forgot how to breathe. It was 1954, and women like us didn't exist, not officially. But when our eyes met reflection, when she slowly turned and smiled with the kind of dangerous recognition that could ruin reputations, I knew my carefully constructed life was about to shatter into a million beautiful pieces. Some love stories whisper. This one screams. I never believed in fate until that Tuesday afternoon in September, when the universe conspired to make me late for my own engagement party. The rain had started without warning, turning Boston's pristine streets into rivers of inconvenience. My fiance Charles would be furious. Punctuality was one of his many rigid expectations, along with demure silence and an heir within 2 years of marriage. I was checking my appearance one final time in the hotel's ornate powder room when she walked in. She moved like liquid silk, all confidence and controlled grace. Her dress was the color of midnight, hugging curves that made my mouth go dry. When she caught me staring in the mirror, she didn't look away like a proper lady should. Instead, she held my gaze with an intensity that made my knees weak. "Terrible weather," she said, her voice carrying the slightest hint of a southern drawl. "Yes," I managed, though I'd forgotten what weather even was. She stepped closer, ostensibly to use the mirror, but I could smell her perfume, something exotic and forbidden. Nothing like the safe florals Charles preferred on me. Our shoulders almost touched. "You seem nervous," she observed, applying lipstick the color of sin. "Special occasion?" "My engagement party," I whispered, hating how the words tasted like ash dot. Something flickered across her face, disappointment. "Challenge?" She capped her lipstick slowly, deliberately. "Congratulations," she said, but her tone suggested anything but celebration. "I'm sure he's very suitable." The way she said suitable made it sound like a disease. I wanted to defend Charles, to explain that he was everything a woman should want in 1954: stable, respectable, devoted to maintaining the natural order of things. Instead, I found myself studying her reflection, memorizing the curve of her neck, the way she bit her lower lip in concentration. "I should go," I said, but my feet remained planted. She turned then, facing me directly instead of through the mirror. Up close, her eyes were the color of aged whiskey, warm and intoxicating. She reached out, her fingers barely grazing my wrist as she adjusted my bracelet, a gesture so intimate it felt more scandalous than if she'd kissed me right. "There, perhaps we'll see each other again," she said. "I'm Vivian, by the way." "Vivian Cross. Margaret," I breathed. "Margaret Coleman, soon to be Margaret something else entirely." I imagine. She left me standing there, trembling and confused, my engagement party suddenly feeling more like a funeral than a celebration. 3 weeks passed before I saw Vivian again, though she haunted my thoughts like a fever dream. I couldn't shake. I'd gone through the motions of being the perfect. Fiancé smiled at Charles's boring business associates, nodded approvingly at china patterns, and pretended enthusiasm for our spring wedding plans. But every night I lay in bed replaying those few minutes in the powder room, wondering what it would have felt like if she'd actually kissed me. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, it left me aching with a hunger I couldn't name. I was browsing the literature section at Feline's when I heard that honeyed drawl behind me. "Interesting choice," Vivian said, noting the book of poetry in my hands. "Emily Dickinson." She understood the language of hidden desires. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. She looked even more stunning in daylight, wearing an emerald green dress that made her eyes sparkle like jewels. "Are you following me?" I asked, trying for indignation but achieving only breathlessness. "Boston isn't that large, darling." Besides, she stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "If I were following you, don't you think I'd be more subtle?" The endearment sent heat spiraling through my chest. No one had ever called me darling with such casual intimacy, not even Charles. I shouldn't be talking to you, I said weakly. Why? Because you're engaged to someone else, or because I'm a woman? Her directness was like a slap and a caress simultaneously. Both, I admitted. She smiled then, slow and predatory. Have lunch with me? I can't. One lunch? What's the harm in that? She tilted her head, studying me with those whiskey eyes. Unless you're afraid. Pride has always been my weakness. I'm not afraid of anything. Prove it. 30 minutes later, we were seated in a small cafe in the North End, far from the society circles where I might be recognized. Vivian ordered for both of us in flawless Italian, making the elderly waiter blush and smile. You're full of surprises, I observed. You have no idea, she replied, her gaze holding promises I didn't dare interpret. We talked about everything: books, art, travel, dreams deferred, and desires unspoken. She'd lived in Paris for 2 years, studying photography before her family's scandal forced her return to America. I told her about my abandoned plans to study literature at Radcliffe, how my parents had deemed education unnecessary for a woman destined for marriage and motherhood. What do you want, Margaret? She asked suddenly, leaning forward with intensity that made my breath catch. Not what your parents want, not what Charles wants. What do you want? The question hung between us like a challenge. I'd never considered it before. My wants had always been secondary to expectations, obligations, the careful maintenance of propriety. I don't know, I whispered. Liar. The afternoon everything changed started innocently enough. If anything about my relationship with Vivian could ever be called innocent. We'd been meeting secretly for 6 weeks, stolen lunches and walks through the common, conversations that felt more intimate than anything I'd ever shared with Charles. I told myself we were simply friends, that the electricity between us was my imagination, that the way she looked at me didn't mean what I desperately hoped it meant. Was lying to myself with the dedication of a martyr. Come to my apartment, she said one rainy Thursday as we lingered over coffee at our usual cafe. I want to show you something. Every rational part of my brain screamed warnings, but I'd stopped listening to rational thought weeks ago. Vivian had become my drug, and I was thoroughly addicted. Her apartment was nothing like I'd expected bohemian, where mine was traditional, filled with photographs and paintings that spoke of a life lived boldly. She poured wine, something French and expensive, and showed me her photography collection. Pictures of Paris, of women in cafes, of shadows and light that captured emotions I couldn't name. This one, I said, stopping at a photograph of 2 women's hands almost touching across a table. It's beautiful. It's about longing, she said quietly, moving to stand behind me. The space between reaching and touching. The moment before everything changes. Her breath whispered against my neck, and I shivered despite the wine's warmth. When I turned, she was inches away, her eyes dark with something that made my stomach flutter. Margaret, she whispered, my name a prayer on her lips. I'm engaged, I said weakly, a last desperate attempt at propriety. Are you happy? The question shattered something inside me. Happy? I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly happy. Content, perhaps, secure, but happy. That wild, reckless joy I felt whenever Vivian smiled at me. No, I admitted, the word barely audible. She cupped my face with trembling hands. Then stop pretending you are. When she kissed me, the world shifted on its axis. Her lips were soft and urgent, tasting of wine and rebellion and everything I'd never allowed myself to want. I kissed her back with 6 weeks of suppressed desire, my hands fisting in her dark hair. We broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air. I can't, I whispered, even as my body betrayed my words, leaning into her warmth. You can, she said firmly. You're just scared? Of course I'm scared. This is ... I gestured helplessly between us. It's impossible. It's love. She finished quietly. The word hung between us like a benediction and a curse. Love. The thing I'd convinced myself. I felt for Charles. The safe emotion that would secure my future and satisfy my family's expectations. This wasn't that careful, planned affection. This was wildfire, consuming and dangerous and absolutely terrifying. Say it back, she demanded, her hand still framing my face. Vivian, say it. I looked into those whiskey eyes and saw my future, not the one mapped out by society and family expectations, but the one my heart had been reaching for without my permission. I love you, I whispered, and felt something fundamental shift in the universe. 3 days after I spoke those 3 impossible words, I sat in Charles's pristine living room, staring at the engagement ring that had once symbolized my future and now felt like a shackle. You seem distracted lately, darling, Charles observed, not looking up from his newspaper. Pre-wedding nerves, I suppose. Perfectly natural. If only he knew how desperately I'd been trying to convince myself that marrying him was natural, expected, right? But love, real love, had ruined everything. Vivian hadn't pressured me after our kiss. She'd simply held me while I cried tears I couldn't explain, then walked me home in silence. But her words echoed in my mind. You have a choice, Margaret. You've always had a choice. Choice. Such a simple word for something that could destroy everything I'd ever known. The wedding was in 2 weeks. Invitations had been sent, flowers ordered, my dress hanging in the closet like a beautiful ghost. My mother called daily with updates, her excitement palpable as she planned what she called the social event of the season, but I couldn't stop thinking about Vivian's hands in my hair, her lips against mine, the way she'd whispered my name like a prayer. I couldn't stop remembering how alive I'd felt in her arms, more myself than I'd ever been in Charles's presence. I need to tell you something, I said suddenly, my voice cutting through the comfortable evening silence. Charles folded his paper, giving me his full attention with the patience of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. Of course, darling. What is it? I opened my mouth to tell him about Vivian, about the love that had turned my world upside down, about the choice I couldn't avoid making any longer. But looking at his kind, unsuspecting face, I realized the cruelty of the truth. Charles was a good man who deserved better than a wife who could never love him the way he deserved to be loved. I can't marry you, I whispered instead. The words fell between us like stones into still water, creating ripples that would eventually become waves. Charles stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. I beg your pardon? I can't marry you, Charles. I'm sorry, but I can't. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a hurt so profound it made my chest ache. Is there someone else? I thought of Vivian waiting for me to choose between the life I'd been given and the life I wanted to claim. Yes, I said quietly. There is. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Charles stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his shoulders rigid with shock and betrayal. Who is he? He asked finally. Another choice. Another moment where truth could set me free or destroy everything. But some truths were too dangerous for 1954, too scandalous for Boston society to forgive. It doesn't matter who, I said instead. What matters is that I've realized I can't build a life with you when my heart belongs to someone else. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. Charles was quiet for a long time, processing the implosion of his carefully planned future. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, dignified, even in devastation. I see. Well, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss then. I slipped the engagement ring from my finger and placed it gently on his coffee table. The small click it made against the glass sounded like the end of one life and the most terrifying beginning of another. 2 hours later, I stood outside Vivian's apartment building, my suitcase in hand and my future completely uncertain. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, her face transformed with understanding and hope. "I made my choice," I said simply. She pulled me into her arms, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly home. Love isn't always convenient. It doesn't always fit into society's neat little boxes or follow the rules we're taught to obey. Sometimes love is rebellion, revolution, the courageous act of choosing truth over comfort. Margaret and Vivian's story reminds us that the most meaningful relationships often require the most courage, the bravery to be authentic, to choose love over expectation, to build a life that honors who we truly are rather than who we're supposed to be. Ready to explore more stories of forbidden love and courageous choices? Subscribe to receive exclusive content about love that defies convention and the brave souls who dare to choose authenticity over acceptance.